And hello again and welcome back to the second part of the France 24 debate. I'm Annette Young and it's time for the world to reboot its view of Africa. That was the message to the continent's leader when US President Barack Obama addressed the African Union this Tuesday. His speech marked the end of a 5-day visit that included an earlier stop in Kenya, the homeland of his late father. But just as much as Obama says the world needs to change its view of Africa, he went on to point out that equally African leaders need to clean up corruption, uphold democratic freedoms, support human rights and to step down when their terms expire.
Nothing will unlock Africa's economic potential more than ending the cancer of corruption. And you are right that it is not just a problem of Africa, it is a problem of those who do business with Africa. It is not unique to Africa. Corruption exists all over the world, including in the United States. But here in Africa, corruption drains billions of dollars from economies that can't afford to lose billions of dollars.
But after that standing ovation and the enormous amount of clapping is finished, are his remarks going to resonate? Joining me here to discuss this is Prince Randy Kassoon Alan Sogan, Chairman and President of Black Lion Rising Investments, Michael Kirtley, producer of the World Memory Film Project, Sheikh Ibn Umar, a former Chadian Foreign Minister, and Japeth Omojua, a Nigerian blogger who's joining us from Abuja. Let me start with you, Sheikh. President Obama referred to the urgent task of generating jobs for a population that's expected to double to around 2 billion people in the coming decades. And that, obviously, he says, would be done with US help. But critics say that actually the American president has done less than his predecessors. Direct financial assistance, which was increased quite dramatically during the reign of George W. Bush, has somewhat lessened, it's fallen away, because Obama is choosing trade, not aid. Does that work as an approach?
First of all, Africa, of course, has been facing many problems. But if we shall, specify one single problem, it would be youth employment or youth unemployment. That is a reality. But the problem in Africa, which explains corruption and youth unemployment, is that we have no dynamic economic, production-oriented economy. That's the problem. There is rentier economy.
And that's, where digital technology can help, surely.
Yeah. So we need heavy investment in terms of infrastructure, new technologies,
manufacturing,
training in order to manufacture our own, goods. That's the problem here. So just, some aid package, it would help in case of emergencies.
Yes.
And US aid and Western aid in general are very efficient when it comes to humanitarian aid, for instance. But it is not sufficient and it won't allow us to move forward from a backward economy to a really developing economy. That is the main challenge, I think.
I like to pick up on that. I completely agree with him because, the biggest challenge we are facing in Africa now is youth unemployment. You know that nearly 70% of the African population is under the age of 25, which is massive when you take 1.2 billion Africans. And in the next 10 to 15 years, there's going to be every single year about 10 million more youth in the working age in Africa. So how do we create jobs for these people? And this is the real bomb that we are sitting on in Africa.
So how do you create jobs?
How do we do that? Is, for example, first of all, we have to develop the basic infrastructure in Africa that allows for businesses to thrive. That's infrastructure, that's energy. We have to connect cities. We have to have lights. We have to have electricity. And we also need to develop the potential that each country has. Instead of just relying on commodities, on extractive industries, which, as we've seen with the drop in the oil prices, some countries like Angola, Sudan, and Algeria are struggling now. And Nigeria itself is struggling heavily because they depend on one income source. we need to diversify our economies, and we need to invest in other areas that are also can create a lot of value, such as light manufacturing. Ethiopia is doing that beautifully right now, to create manufacture shoes and bags and all kinds of things that can be used for exports. There are people there. There are young people who just praying to have jobs.
Randy, these are themes that we've been hearing about
Yeah.
for the last 40 years. These are not new themes,
Yeah.
Youth unemployment, diversification of the sectors,
Yes.
Further education, less corruption. These answers don't seem to have worked in the same. I mean, how are you going to get it to work now? I'm very confused about
It's
this.
working. How does it work? It's work with foreign direct investment. It's work with the U.S. business community led by Obama to understand that we need the U.S. venture capital firms, we need the U.S. private equity firms to come and help us understand the Silicon Valley culture, to create more startups, to create more smaller enterprises that can grow also the economy. This is not only a problem of a government.
I just want to, at this point, bring in Japheth from Abuja. I understand that you have something to say, Japheth?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we need to pay attention to the foundation of economic development. Do we have the right laws in place that allows for property rights? Because as an investor, I want to first of all ask myself, is my money safe in this country? Are my property safe in this country? And I think one of the major challenges around the continent is the fact that we don't respect property rights as much as we should. Some of the land laws are as archaic as our years of independence. So we need to pay attention to that. Secondly, we need to ask ourselves, these our economies are actually really and truly free. You cannot create wealth in an atmosphere where the government can wake up in the morning and just change the policy out of nowhere, or where the National Assembly can just decide, oh, today we are banning this, or tomorrow we are lifting the ban on this. The economic system has to be free enough for an investor to trust that this thing works. The market dictates the price. No, there's no economy in the world where the market absolutely dictates the price. But the most prosperous countries are countries where the market rules over the president or the House of Assembly's dictations. So we need to pay attention to our laws. Our institutions have to be viral enough. They have to be stronger than our leaders. The free market has to reign. When that is done, we would naturally attract investors. Because see, somebody spoke about the labor market. By 2040, Africa would have the biggest labor market in the world, bigger than China by 2040. And two things are possible. Two of them will not happen at the same time. It's either we pay the price of having this mass of people without jobs, or we produce the human capital for the world. But how do we produce the human capital for the world? It's not just enough to have the population. We have to develop our educational system. Our educational system has to be responsive to the needs of the world. The top 10 jobs in the world today did not exist a decade ago. So Africa's educational system must be ready to produce graduates that are able to fit into a world where the problems have not even started already. And then develop these people, give them capacity to be able to supply them, not just for the needs of the African economy, but the global economy.
There seems to be, in the words that I'm hearing here, there seems to be some sort of, and also from you, Randy, a kind of thought process that says that answer has to come from the outside, investment from the outside, from Silicon Valley, from others. And I think that the real question is where is the investment going to come from inside Africa and from different inside African countries themselves? Because there's also another factor, and that is we're talking about, he just mentioned China. In the time that President Obama has been in power, China has more than quadrupled its advantage over the United States in terms of investment. They are investing.
Michael, at this point, let's just listen to what the US president indirectly had to say about China.
Economic relationships can't simply be about building countries' infrastructure with foreign labor or extracting Africa's natural resources. Real economic partnerships have to be a good deal for Africa. They have to create jobs and capacity for Africans. That's the kind of partnership America offers. Nothing will unlock Africa's economic potential more than ending the cancer of corruption.
So, Michael, as you know, you were saying, I mean, America's power in the region has clearly weakened. Is it possible that Washington can regain influence on the continent?
Well, I feel that when President Obama makes he's definitely, you know, giving a dig at China in terms of the way that China I think in 2013 $300 billion of investment in terms of loans and infrastructure building in Africa. And on the other hand, the United States hasn't done much during that time to actually fill the void that President Obama is talking about. If President Obama believed what he's saying, it seems to me that he would have had the pulpit, he would have had the power to actually make some of this happen. And honestly, infrastructure is important. You can't hope to have African entrepreneurs who are going to create wealth and create jobs for themselves if they don't have a good infrastructure to work with.
Sheikh?
I agree with Michael when he responded to the observation made by Jafet, I think, and by Prince also about the responsibility, the inner responsibility of African. But I think that we need also investments from outside Africa. Because if you take the example of Europe after World War II, or Korea, you know, the development has not come through trade, but through heavy investment, foreign investment on the manufacturing sector. So I think that we cannot bypass this necessity.
So you're saying we need a Marshall Plan for Africa?
We can be inspired by it, but I think that we need some bold economic program and not a piecemeal program which can be effective on some specific areas, but do not solve the problem as a whole. And all the responsibility, I agree with you, with the African, is the political climate and the institutional environment. Talking of Ethiopia, you know what the Ethiopian call area number 9? In the central prison and Addis Ababa, there is 8 areas. So the prisoners called area number 1 the rest of Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. That is an illustration of the political oppression that's there. So the responsibility of African is to create a political environment conducive to personal initiative and to foreign investment.
The reason why I mentioned about, you know, foreign investment, foreign direct investment, because we are talking about aid and trade and investment. That's 3 different things. As where we stand now, China has only put about under $4 billion of aid as we stand today, whereas the U.S. is pumping in $8 billion of aid, and European Union $6 billion. So what does that show? China is investing in areas that need to be invested in. Aid alone does not solve any problem. This is a modern slavery. You know, aid is only useful in emergency situations. What I'm saying is that the U.S. needs to reconsider its strategy, its commercial strategy in Africa. The U.S. has certain strength in terms of security, you know, in terms of technology, in terms of the financial markets, but they need to focus in Africa now. They cannot catch up with China anymore. They cannot catch up with Southeast Asia or with the emerging countries of the BRICS. They just cannot. So whatever Obama does, he will not succeed. What he should do is that he should reorient the efforts of the United States towards entrepreneurship, towards technology, towards a strategy, national strategies on how to have better securities, because we have those issues as well. So I'm just trying to say that the U.S. needs to reconsider its strategy. I'm not saying that Africans themselves should not be investing in their own countries. They are. We have Tony Lumelu, we have Aliko Dangote, we have Patrice Motsepe. There's many billionaires in Africa today that are pumping their own billions into developing African businesses. So we have to give them some credit.
And Prince Randy, the other major theme emerging from this trip was his comments about the need to empower women and girls in Africa. And I say this looking at a panel here of all men, and I do apologise for that as a result. But, I mean, it does show that African countries are lagging way behind when it comes to education for young women and also other issues such as sexual violence. I mean, just how effective can America and the international community be in changing cultural traditions that still hold so strong in so many areas?
Yes, this is a major area also that I'm glad you're mentioning, and I'm also disappointed that there's no woman or African woman on the podium here to be able to tell us their own experience. But what I've seen in Africa, in all the African countries I go through, every single African country is mainly driven by women. This is the truth. It's mainly driven by women, especially
your country, Benin.
Yes, in Benin, in Ghana, in Togo, in Senegal. It's women who are the foundations, the pillars of economic growth in Africa. However, they're not playing a center role. They are not in the front stage simply because a lot of them don't have access to proper education. A lot of them, don't have access to finance to develop their little commerces. But still, in the informal economy, which is the biggest, economy that's creating more employment in Africa, and agriculture sector, it's women who are driving it. So it's not a question of women are not having opportunity. What we need to do is to convert these activities into something more formal and give them more tools and more financial support. And of course, education and healthcare are universal issues as well.
And at this point, let me bring in Japeth from Abuja. What do you say about the need to include women? And can the international community be part of that push?
Everybody has to be part of it, but Africa has to realize that it's an economic decision. And like the president said in Kenya, do you want to have a team where you're preventing about half of your team from playing? I mean, it's just imagine Zamalek of Egypt playing Orlando Pirates of South Africa, and then the Orlando Pirates team decided that 5 of their players should stop moving and just let 6 of their players play against 11. They definitely will lose. So Africa has to begin to look at this as really and truly an economic issue. Women are enterprising. First of all, they are virtually half of the population. They are enterprising. They are mostly the farmers, and now they don't have access to the land. They have to rent, and that in itself is an inhibition. The area where the international community will play a role is to find a way to attach certain engagements and certain deals, situations of agreement where they are able to mandate the government and their partners to have a certain number of women in these setups. I think that would help. But the individual countries have to begin to see that it's an economic decision. If you don't let your women thrive, it's going to be extremely difficult to have your economy thrive.
Ashek?
Well, I'm sorry to say that I don't buy very much into this narrative about the women in Africa being the pillars of the economy. It is true, but in the slavery-based economy, we may say that the slaves are the base of the economy. All the burden is with women, of course, but it is kind of exploitation. There is no empowerment here. I think that.
So how do you change that?
Well, as Mr. Alam Sogan has said, Africa is not a homogeneous country. It is very different from another. The region I know, especially the Sahelian countries, the main problem is early marriage. And girls get into forced marriage at 12, sometimes earlier than 12. They have their first children at 13 or 14, and they end up, on average, with 10 or 12 children. So they cannot do anything. I think the main problem in our society, especially when Islam is very influential, is early marriage.
This brings
a religious problem.
This brings up, I think, one part of the legacy of President Obama that we haven't talked about is the fight against terrorism and the fight against the rise of Islamic radicalism. And you have to, in dealing with the question of women in Africa, which is a question that I've actually worked with quite a bit in Africa, you cannot divorce that from cultural change that takes place in different parts of Africa, and which is due in part to wealth. The more wealth that you have, it's much more likely that women will also take advantage of that wealth. But the more religious change that's happening in the Sahel, for example, the less likely that the women are going to have more and more opportunities. And I think that through the military efforts that President Obama has undertaken, it's grown exponentially in the time that he's been in power through the spread of the influence of AFRICOM in places like Niger and Chad and Somalia.
And it's also been very difficult for him, as he says, to say that these are not Western values that he's talking about, but human values.
Well, I don't think that Africans would think that I've never heard an African that I know say that women shouldn't have rights to do things. I'm sure that they exist, but among the Africans that I've been among, women are very, very, I know many women who are extremely powerful. It's a question of access. It's a question of access to capacity. It's a question of access to education. In Morocco, for example, which is a country that I go to quite often, there are women who are extraordinarily powerful, despite the fact that other people might say that it's a Muslim or an Arab country.
Yes.
But there are many women in Morocco, because they live in impoverished backgrounds, in the mountains or in the countryside, who don't have that same kind of access, and other women are helping them. This is true in Senegal. This is true in Ivory Coast. This is true in Nigeria. Women who have power, who have economic power, or women who are less likely to be left behind.
Okay, well, at this point, it's time now for the Media Watch segment. Just stay tuned for Media Watch with James Creedon. Is here, having been sort of spending the afternoons on the internet and going by Barack Obama's Twitter account. This trip to Africa was very much a family trip.
That's right. Well, he does have this sort of folksy style in terms of his rhetoric, and even if you go onto his official Twitter account, he presents himself, before he presents himself as the 44th president of the US, he presents himself as dad and husband. So, you know, the family theme is very present in how President Obama communicates, and indeed in one of his most recent tweets, proud to be the first African president to visit Kenya, happy to see family, to talk with young Kenyans about the future. So the family theme very much strong, even in reference to Lucy. Now, this is when he got to Ethiopia, of course, visiting an ancestor, so making that personal link. But of course, it was pointed out by one of the curators that, in fact, Donald Trump is also descended from Lucy. So I'm not sure exactly how he feels about that. But he did broaden it all out, and he made a speech a little bit later talking about the connections with humanity. We are reminded that Ethiopians, Americans, and all people of the world are part of the same human family, the same chain, perhaps with the exception of Donald Trump. But I think he might have to accept that as a fact. So the family theme present in quite a few different fashions, Annette, in how he was communicating from Africa.
A lot of remarks too about his comments on democracy and the fact that a number of African leaders like to stay on in office.
Overstay their welcome, perhaps, and indeed that's been picked up by a lot of media today. The New York Times, Obama says, I could win a third term as president. So he was pointing to the fact that...
It's a very confident Obama there.
It is quite confident, but apparently the polls do point out that by 48% of Americans seem to have a positive impression of how he has done the job so far. So perhaps he could win a third term, but he was using that to, I suppose, point the finger of blame, in particular at the president of Burundi, who just this month pushed through with elections that gave him a third term in office. And there was criticism of that. Sometimes we hear leaders say, I'm the only person who can hold the nation together. If that's true, then the leader has failed to truly build their nation. So that point was made. It did create some reaction on social media. One Burundi-based Twitter account was pretty critical of the president for I suppose used what President Obama said to pour some scorn on what has happened. You can see that tweet there referring to an illegal third term. Elsewhere, though, some saying that, if I could find the tweet, that perhaps we do not need foreign advice in Africa to do what is right. So I suppose that comment also being made. Obama to African leaders, nobody should be president for life, but to Cuban dictators for life, let me know what you need to stay there, pointed out one Cuban-based Twitter account. So I suppose there is always the potential to point out some contradictions in certain public declarations.
James Creedon there with Media Watch, and at this point I'd like to thank my guests who have been here today talking to me about the President's African legacy. With me was Michael Kirtley, the producer of the World Memory Film Project, Prince Randy Kasu Alam Sogan, Chairman and President of Black Line Rising, Sheikh bin Umar, the former Chadian Foreign Minister, and Japeth Omojua, a Nigerian blogger. Thanks to all of you for making this such a lively discussion. In the meantime, do stay with us here on France 24.